Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'll briefly talk about the PhD I just completed at the Department of Architecture in Parma in a close collaboration with Professor Vittorio Gallese at the Department of Neuroscience. I'll give you a short introduction about why we studied the empathic response and why we studied the case of office environments. Then I'll present you a few consequential implications, a few results we reached before concluded with some more general considerations. I also wanted to make clear that the aim of this research was not to be prescriptive, but only to be descriptive. And also, the research was theoretical. We tried to, we applied for some grants, including Harold Hay grant, but we won none of them. So why empathic response? I think all the talks and presentations at the conference these 2 days have had their focus on a kind of relationship between building and their users. And as we have seen, this can be studied in as many ways as there are branches of social science. In this presentation in Parma, we decided to focus on a cognitive neuroscience model, which is called embodied simulation theory, which was built upon the discovery of mirror neurons for the last 20 years. Also, at this point, I wanted to make clear about the word. I want to spend a few words on the word of empathy, which is kind of ambiguous today, and also sometimes it's misused instead of sympathy. We want to go back to the root of the word empathy, which was coined in German with the word Einfühlung in 1873 by art historian Robert Fischer. And here's a quote. It's the correct translation in English is feeling into, or in feeling. It said, I transpose myself into the inner being of the object and then explore its formal character from within, as it were. This kind of transposition can take a motor or sensitive form, even when it's concerned with lifeless and emotionless forms. And this was, again, 1873. Why office space? Because we think it's ideal for studying some physiological responses to architectural settings. And as noted by Frank Duffy, who is a British architect who has studied office environments for the last 50 years, in office space planning, the major features which vary have to do with short-life scenery, the items in each workplace, and the screens which divide one workplace from another. Furthermore, and mainly, the notion of embodiment and its sensory motor properties find meaningful relationships when situated in a typical and everyday environment like the workplace. And I'll say more later about that. Here we start with some of the implications we reached, implications of embodied simulation in office space. Here I have a couple of illustrations from I think the last catalog of the manufacturer of office furniture, Herman Miller, which is an American brand, one of the best in the world. This is kind of randomly collected, and they call this configurations, these settings, from top to bottom, left to right: Haven, Hive, Jump Space, Clubhouse. Here we have Landing, Workshop, Forum, Plaza. This was just to give you an illustration, example of what we're talking about when we talk about the space around the workplace. I think it all started with this paper published by Giacomo Rizzolatti and colleagues, published on Science. It's titled "The Space Around Us," and it was published in 1997. And you see a couple of illustrations here too. And in this paper, it is described the role of motor areas and motor to sensory pathways for the construction of object and space perception. And also it is emphasized the artificiality of constructing a rigid wall between sensory and motor representations. Indeed, it is shown that the visual receptive fields of neurons in a so-called F4 area, which is a premotor area wired to the primary motor cortex, are circumscribed to the space around the tactile receptive fields. It's also been noticed in this paper that the discharge of these neurons reflects a potential simulated motor action towards a particular spatial location, and providing some empirical evidence of the simulation-based motor nature of the peripersonal space. So we can state that these F4 neurons map the worker's peripersonal space within the workplace. And it can also be concluded that the space around the body within our workplace is thus defined by the motor potentialities and confinements of our body. We call this point a living office, in the sense that German philosopher Edwin Husserl gave to the notions of lived body and lived world. And again, we have a couple of illustrations just to explain better what are we talking about. We said that the discharge of F4 neurons reflects a potential simulated motor action directed within a specific space. And this simulated potential action represents thus a motor space. And here again, Frank Duffy, the British architect, articulated these diagrams based upon dimensions of interaction and autonomy. Here we have kind of more recent example and built example of the Google headquarters in Silicon Valley. And if you can't see it, maybe you can't exactly see the details. Anyway, there's a map, there's a plan of the ground floor and first floor maybe of the buildings, and also on the above on the we have this workplaces which are designed and distributed according to the social interaction they provide. And they also put this scale, it goes from 1 to 13, from hot to cold. The more they provide interaction, to the less. So we said that the simulated potential action represents a motor space. And so action is fundamental to spatial awareness because it is precisely action simulation that integrates multiple sensory modalities within the F4-VAP neural circuit in the brain. So the existence of peripersonal space is supported exactly by the notion that spatial awareness itself is derived from motor activity. It can be stated thus that the same neural structures involved in the unconscious modeling of the acting body in space also contribute to the awareness of the lived body and of the objects that the office environment contains. Vision and action are thus parts of an integrated system, and the sight of an object and at a given location automatically triggers a simulated potential action directed towards that object. This integrated sensory motor system is thus responsible for the phenomenal awareness of the body, the capacity of action understanding, and space and action conscious awareness, and the substantiation of experience. Is another implication. The notion of effective workplace, which is a workplace where both the organization and the employees thrive successfully, is commonly debated and as the ultimate goal for every office environment. We proposed here the notion of affective workplace as a unitary representation of the relationship between office space and its users. The art historian Heinrich Wölfflin at the end of the 19th century, for the first time explicitly questioned the fact that architectural forms are able to express emotions and moods. In regard to corporate interiors, it might seem to be less the case, or even an irrelevant case, also due to the fact they are generally not designed with such intentions. It is not the aim of this presentation to discuss the idea that a particular building might evoke a certain emotional response, though we focused on the role of emotions in a biological sense as the innate system of values through which the environment is precognitively evaluated. And we distinguish two kinds of emotions, those arising by aesthetic pleasure and those resulting from aesthetic judgment. And the aesthetic pleasure is the result of automatic hedonic responses, while aesthetic judgment requires explicit cognitive appraisal. I had to kind of accelerate a bit. The empathic response is based on users' bodily motor potentialities and always carries an affective experience of or emotional response, measured, for example, in terms of cardiorespiratory frequency, blood pressure, or hormonal response. In this context, embodied simulation is conceived as an unconscious, pre-reflective functional mechanism of the brain-body system. It can be concluded so that the sense we attribute to our lived experience of the world is grounded in the affective latent relational quality of our body's action potentialities, enabled by the way they are mapped in our brains. The last implication, this is the most speculative part, since it has been shown that the reciprocal relationship between buildings and their users always involves affective and emotional aspects that are neurologically based. It is now to be explored how the reiteration of the same experience loses strength over time, shifting between the new and the familiar. And indeed, the emotional grounding and the reiteration of the spatial experience that the worker induces in their daily routines is thus for implication for the notion of body simulation in corporate interiors. In fact, office space is generally experienced as a big ground reality.
I'm afraid you're going to have to wind up pretty quickly.
The worker's attention is focused on the performance of their task. And at this stage also, the notion of familiarity needs to be introduced as an invisible temporal dimension. We have two different kind of notion of familiarity within the collective and versus the individual experience. And the collective experience is related primarily to the type of office space. It sets the stage, reference, and context within which the experience office space, within which we experience office space over time, while the individual experience involves the reiteration of the typical daily experience. And in this case, the user establishes a form of attunement with the space. So finally, we speculate that when the perceptual experience of an architectural space becomes gradually familiar, it means it has made a biological impression on our brain-body system. And within this context, it might also be argued that as it is primarily by means of mirror mechanisms and embodied simulation that we experience the space around us, it is by the same means that the space around us literally makes an impression on us. There might be some reservation on, anyway, I think I can stop here.
Yeah.
And
thank you very much. I don't think we have any time for questions. We can speak with him at the break if you wish. Thank you. Thanks a lot.